As I said, politics and religions are intersectional when we are talking about order. So democratic order is what really at stake in these presentations, and the dynamic of the order dependent on the way religions are functional and also the way nation states are defined and set into practices. Now, in more specific way, what is the intersectionality between politics and religion relevant to understanding of democratization, more specifically in Asia? The first relevance is because there is always tension between the specificity of the notion and the actualization or the value or the principle upon which order should be operational. For example, when we talk about idea of nation state, we cannot making specific reference to the idea of nation state as it was defined under the Westphalian principle 100 years ago, because when idea was set up, it was taking place in Europe, and as Europe colonialized more and more countries all over the world, then the idea of nation state was spread out. And then after the World War II, when big bang of new independent country was born, they have to adopt in adapting the idea of nation state, because nation state was defined by European, and because the context was not European, so then we have to be more specific in defining a nation state. And as I said, in the Indonesian case, we have idea of adopting European type of state, but within one note, that is, there are a lot of religious affinity, religious nationalism was there, and therefore then we cannot just looking after one religion. And even within one religion, there are different grouping. Islam is not homogeneous when we look at the practices in Indonesia, and because there are different ways of practicing Islam, then there are different groups legitimately claiming Islamic identity. But then what brings them together is the actualizations of the idea of Islam. And therefore, when we talk about legal status of Islamic group, then we are suffering from problem of specificity. But when we talk about Islam as a value, as a belief, as a principle, then it's very easy to negotiate. For example, Islam committed to peace, and therefore making peace should be subject to every Muslim. Islam talk about humanity, and when humanity is set forth, then the idea of bringing about Islam is much easier. But the problem is that because democracy has been defined in terms of liberal principle, and for liberal principle we have to run general election, and in winning election then we have to mobilize support. Then easiest way to mobilize support is to mobilize the religious sentiment and identity. Therefore, then the value, the principle, the belief of the religions was set aside, and then on the name of Islamic party or Islamic grouping, then we try to mobilize, and therefore the specificity of interpretation of religion become a problematic. Therefore, then, if Islam or other religion should be brought into practice, then we have to move to the idea, the belief, the value of particular religion, and making the value workable for democracy is the great challenge. For example, as Indonesia was struggling with electoral politics for many decades after independence, then religious identity was become the style of political participation. And every grouping was mobilizing their own sentiment, and then religion, as I said, become a dividing variable. Now, then Islam become identity, and in order to get rid of the idea of identity making, then Indonesia in 80s was setting up new discourse. What really at stake is not religious identity, but religiosity. So Islam means to be ethical commitment rather than identity, and as ethical commitment are easily to demand, then the power of discourse on Islamicity or Islamic as ethic getting more prominent, and the actualizations allows us to negotiate across grouping among Islam and also across religious belief. And as the commonality between religious belief was taken more seriously, then the specificity of claiming identity of religion should be overcome by the actualizations or setting up religious ethic into practice. So the relevance of looking after the relationship is because of liberal democracy tend to be preoccupied with mobilization of people on the name of specificity of identity, specificity of organization, specificity of grouping, and then it's easily divide people. Now, the tendency to be more deliberative in democracy is easier to set into practice because democracy is a matter of believing or respecting other humanity then at stake, and religions meant to be for human being, not only for pleasing God. And the ways of presenting religion as instrument for some other purposes become very challenging notion. So ethic is what really at stake. And the other relevance is that there is important to understanding religion in more humane way, because on the name of religion, people do many things. On the name of God, people are killing people, and this is wrong religious practice, and because of the mobilizations of specific interpretations of religion, and therefore then the new invention is important, as I said, because of the preoccupation in Indonesia to mobilize political identity and political sentiment. Then there was initiative to invent discourse on religiosity. The other example is that because Indonesia understand the danger of mobilizations of religious sentiment, then from the beginning and along the historical trajectory, Indonesia has been trying to prevent the emergence of Islamic State. And the way to do so is to invent the idea of state ideology. So for the sake of political engineering, state was declared or claiming a particular ideological setup. We call it Pancasila. There are 5 values, which typically is generic universal values, but by taking the values into considerations, then state have a claim of having state ideology, and on the name of bringing state ideology into practice, then the invention is functioning. So we do have like blanket words, Pancasila. It can mean everything, but we come to an agreement on the value entailed within it, and therefore then the invention of Pancasila as state ideology is important. Otherwise, we just set ourselves in an ungovernable situation, and invention of state ideology is important. And this is the experience from Indonesia. And because of that reasons, then when we want to bring democracy, we cannot just taking the notion of democracy, nation state, religion for granted. So then we have to be clear what we are talking about, and not to get confused the religious identity with the ideas, religious values, and understanding and make more contextual, more proper understanding of religions is important. For example, the so-called radical Islamic group was, according to me, interpreting religion as ways of pleasing God according to their interpretation of God. But the God in the study of Quran I know is setting religion for humans. But the idea that humanity is important and religion is also to make a world order, human being order, has not been taken very seriously because of the epistemological fallacy. And therefore then when we want to understand how religion and politics relate, then we have to engage at the philosophical level, more specifically problem of understanding things, or how we come to believe, we come to a conclusion what religiosity means and what the danger of mobilizing religious identity. So because of that situation, the importance of taking religious context and the importance of making nation-state workable to accommodate a particular religious setup, then we propose that each country in Asia and elsewhere in the world to self-searching, self-modifying in order to make sure that the religions are in a good shape, in a workable situation, and the idea of bringing statehood should be guided by the national situation. Then we need to make reference to global standard, global idea as inspiration, but not as a blueprint to be practiced, to be exercised in particular country. For a big country like Indonesia, well, Indonesia has 3 time zones. The distance from west to the east is more or less the same distance from east coast of United States to the west coast. And therefore then we cannot make one system easily applicable elsewhere throughout the region. And therefore then dealing with diversity is important. And as diversity is an important issue in Indonesia, then state of Indonesia has been taking unity and diversity seriously, and we have to remake again and again in attempt to search the Indonesian model of democracy. We do have a problem during Sukarno era to deal with religious affair into statehood, and then we come up with the authoritarian solution. But after the authoritarian under President Suharto, then we make another experience in which we are dealing with unity and diversity principle more seriously. For the sake of uniting the country, on the one hand we make a sudden change in the political thinking, we provide the freedom from the government, and on the other hand the government also decentralized its authority to the local. And paradoxically, the granting of freedom and local autonomy what allowing Indonesia to get united. This is the self-searching, because in the past we believe that the only way to make the country united is through centralistic rule, but it happened that as the country are so huge and so diverse, then massive decentralization was at need, and religious belief was set into practice. And then we have old model of centrally governed religious affair into more self-serving religious practices. And again, what make the Indonesian model reliable is because there has been a process of political engineering, and the engineering is dealing the paradox to unite by governing the diversity, and the diversity of ethnicity, diversity of religion become the main element. And if Indonesia successful in bringing about democracy within the Islamic context, this is because of the experiment that Indonesia has been experiencing in the last few decades. So I suppose the participants of this talk who come from different countries can make a comparative analysis on how each country should model and what sort of lesson drawing can be taken from other countries, including Indonesian experience, as I present in this talk. Okay, so the next question is, if that is the case, what does democratization really entail within this context? If the linkages between democracy and how democracy linked to religion and design of nation state works, then what really entail, and then by identifying this, we can figure out how do we go about it. This is going to be the talk on the next session.